They made me sit at the far end of my own walnut table, the one polished so bright you could see your future in it if you had one worth seeing. And my wife poured a glass of Cabernet with the calm of a heart surgeon who had already decided which artery to cut. And her lover, the corporate attorney who called himself a fiduciary with a straight face, unfolded a manila envelope with the ceremony of a flag raising and told me that for the sake of harmony, family unity, and efficient estate planning, I should sign the transfer instrument so that everyone could stop living in fear of volatility. And I looked at the pen, then at the faces of the two people who believed I was a soft man with a soft head. And I smiled in the way you smile when the punchline arrives before the joke. Because I had already seen this scene. I had seen it a month ago when the draft calendar invite landed by accident on our shared iPad. And I watched the rehearsal footage they shot of themselves in a hotel room where they practiced how to persuade me, how to cry on cue, how to turn the words betrayal and family into a hallmark speech. So now I put the pen down and said very gently that there was a detail they both had missed, which is not surprising because details are small and easy to step over when you are sprinting toward $130 million. And the attorney chuckled the way men chuckle at a birthday party when the cake arrives, and he moved the papers closer. And that is when I turned the screen of the conference tablet toward them and pressed play, and our home filled with their voices. The same voices now sitting across from me, plotting timing and forging signatures and rehearsing fake reconciliation. And my wife turned the color of reheated porcelain and said this was not what it looked like, which is the eternal song of a cheating wife sung in every register from Beverly Hills to Boise, and I nodded with compassion because a lie deserves at least the courtesy of a nod before it dies. And then I said the meeting tonight was being live-streamed to 3 places, one of which was a law firm on La Cienega that does not own a yacht, and I watched the lover's pupils shrink and his lips thin into paperwork. And I said we were going to back up a little if they did not mind, and tell the story in reverse so that every step of the plan could be admired like an art heist at a museum. And the lover said this was unnecessary. And I said unnecessary is what people say right before accountability walks in. So we rewound the tape to where this actually began, which was not marriage, not money, but a Tuesday in April when a delivery driver left the wrong bouquet at the right door and the wrong name at the right house. I will admit I love the performance of it, the parody of domestic bliss with a track underneath that sounded like a kettle about to scream, the way the lover's suit spoke the language of crisp, billable hours, while his shoes spoke the language of a man who would sprint if the lights went out. The way my wife could cry without smearing mascara, because betrayal grows a new set of waterproof glands, and as I told them we would start at the end and walk backward. I felt the strange, weightless calm that arrives when revenge ceases to be a theory and becomes a schedule. The attorney repositioned his watch so the face would catch the chandelier and flash at me like a charm. And my wife, who once said our family was her cathedral, shifted her knee so that the hem of her dress drifted exactly where she wanted my attention to land. And I understood in a practical way that love and theater are cousins who borrow each other's costumes. Here is how the final scene had been assembled behind their backs while they practiced theirs. The pen they offered me was not a pen, not in any meaningful sense, because I had swapped it for an identical pen with a micro camera that would show the world how fraud is birthed in suburban lighting. The papers they brought were not the papers they thought they were, because my estate counsel and I had created mirror sets that looked the same but spoke different languages to banks, and my trust architecture had already split into 4 entities that nested like Russian dolls and were surrounded by a conditional firewall titled the Good Faith Defense, which triggers at the scent of conspiracy, and I had seeded every account with what my forensic accountant called glitter, meaning traceable decoys that stick to every hand that reaches for them. But all of that was dessert. The real meal was the narrative, the walk back through the hall where the plan began, because in America, evidence wins cases, but stories win juries, and I wanted them to taste, minute by minute, the way their ambition had braided itself into a rope that they would now climb down into a hole. So I told them about the Tuesday in April when a bouquet arrived with a card signed by someone named L, and my wife said it was a florist mistake, which makes sense if florists now sign with initials and reference private jokes about conference rooms, and I told them how I noticed that the wrong bouquet somehow had the right pronunciation of her middle name, that very few people get right on the first try, and I told them how I installed, with a tender hand, a legal recorder that only activates when someone discusses transfer of beneficial ownership, and how the house then sang like a jukebox of crimes for 2 weeks. I told them how the recordings revealed that the lover was not merely a lover, but a curator of sticky language, how he whistled a tune of community property and framed my discipline as cruelty, framed my attention to contracts as paranoia, framed my devotion to family as weakness that deserved an invoice. And I watched the lover's eyes go to the window, which is what a man does when he wonders how many steps there are to the ground. And I told them how I learned my wife's calendar had a second spine, an encrypted row of events titled Pilates, which astonishingly took place inside an office tower in Century City, and how the passcode she used for most things included our child's birth date. But the passcode she used for the hotel suite included the lover's bar number. I did not raise my voice because rage is a mask, and masks fog the vision, and my vision had to be clear. They asked if I was proud of this theater, if I felt like a hero in an action movie where bullets of paperwork do the killing, and I said I felt like a father washing dishes after a storm so the kitchen does not smell like regret. And I said the truth is far older than movies and far stronger than the phrases they were using to hold their plan together with little gold staples, and I said the phrase, cheating wife, is not a club I want to swing. But it is the correct label on the box they assembled, and if we are going to be adults, then we are going to read labels. The lover exhaled and said this could be resolved privately, and my wife whispered that we could repair the damage for the sake of family if I would stop the recording and sign the amended agreement, because the amended agreement had already been circulated, and she used the phrase already circulated the way a tornado uses the phrase light breeze. I said no. I said we would continue the tour. I said we would visit the country club, the quiet dining room where they met on nights I was away, and we would listen to them talk about my habits as if they were weather patterns, and we would listen to them calculate how to move shares through nominees and charitable vehicles, and we would admire the audacity of their plan to squeeze every drop of my work and rename it ours, and then rename ours hers. And I said, we would move next to the moment when I stopped being a character in their story and started authoring my own. The country club has a rule about hats in the dining room, but there is no rule about treason in the heart, so the maitre d' greeted the two of them with the gentle amnesia that money purchases on demand, and they sat in a corner that pretends to be private, and they drafted a fantasy about how a man like me would sign anything if you sprinkled the right words on top like powdered sugar. And the lover said he knew a judge who liked golf and a mediator who liked cashmere. And my wife said she would bring up therapy, and how our priorities had diverged, and how her emotional labor had gone unpaid, a phrase that lands in certain rooms like scripture, and together they auditioned versions of a future where she was a brave woman correcting an imbalance, and he was a noble counselor helping a distressed spouse liberate assets from a tyrant. And by the second martini, they had discovered a religion called inevitability. They did not know the table lamp behind the leather banquette concealed a lens that owed me a favor, and they did not know the parking lot hears more secrets than the dining room, and they certainly did not know that my assistant, who sees farther than any telescope, had noticed a pattern in my wife's rideshare receipts and had earned herself a very large bonus. You may ask why I did not confront her immediately the day I knew, why I did not explode into the standard scene where a husband smashes a glass and says the words that cause neighbors to step outside. But I believe in architecture more than demolition. The structure of revenge requires load-bearing walls. I wrote a new trust, blueprinted by a woman from Queens who drafts instruments like cathedrals and laughs like a drummer, and she introduced a clause called the honesty dividend, which states that any beneficiary who engages in material deception forfeits accumulated distributions to a scholarship fund with my mother's name on it. And then she narrowed her eyes and said, "We are going to make them show you who they are on the record." I met with a forensic accountant who wears checkerboard socks and loves nothing more than the scent of a faked signature. He taught me about micro-hesitations in ink flow, about how an expensive pen can be a traitor if you ask it to be, about how metadata is gossip that never sleeps. We moved assets into entities named after rivers, because rivers look calm above and work hard below. The lover's practice did not notice the current because he believed that he was the river. There is a point in every conspiracy when the plotters start speaking in the passive voice, as if grammar could absolve them. Mistakes were made, lines were crossed, papers were prepared. I collected their passivity like stamps. I built a calendar of cowardice. On the third Thursday, they toured a lakeside house while talking about my temperament, as if temperament were a hurricane season, and my wife said, "He will not fight me. He avoids scenes. He cares about family too much to make this ugly." And the lover said he had handled worse, and had turned men like me into settlements before. They kissed by a fence as if that could bless the documents. I did not hate them. I did not love them. I observed them the way a scientist observes a lab flame that wants to meet the drapes. The more they planned, the more I saw a strange pity shimmering under my irritation because they were living inside a story where they were both protagonists, and they had forgotten that stories are judged by audiences, and America is an unforgiving audience when the curtain pulls back and the program says "cheating wife" in the cast list. To prepare the switch, I rehearsed too. I practiced how to look naive without looking vacant. I practiced how to ask questions that sounded like a man who wants help rather than a man who has the answers. I took the lover to lunch at a quiet restaurant with flatware that looks like money and asked him to explain a few clauses. And he explained them with the patience of a dentist who already knows which tooth he wants, and he assured me this was all standard and would protect the structure if anything unfortunate happened. And he winced slightly on the word unfortunate, and I asked if there was any risk to my family, and he said none, and I nodded as if he had passed a test. And we both smiled at the same time, which is the smile men share when they understand that the table is a stage. He sent follow-up emails with attachments labeled drafts, and I forwarded them to the woman from Queens who rotates language like a safe dial until the clicks line up, and she wrote back, "This is not a transfer. This is a siphon with a haircut." It is fashionable to believe that betrayal only lives in bedrooms, but it grows even faster in boardrooms. I watched my wife pitch her plan to her confidant during a facial, explaining that the papers would simply correct a few old imbalances and that I would thank her later because the stress of wealth management had made me brittle. And the confidant, who likes to shop for manifesting crystals, said that was brave, and that a man with that much money should learn to share beyond his comfort. And I thought about my father pouring concrete at dawn while his back sang pain. And I thought about the first office I rented when the carpet smelled like old coffee. And I thought about family, the word that is always on the poster when a heist wants moral permission. And I wrote myself a note that said the fastest way to lose the house is to let pity rent the guest room. The plot ripened. The lover adjusted dates in a spreadsheet and miscounted on purpose and called the miscount a roundup for convenience. My wife rehearsed tears in the mirror and practiced to tremble. And one night I watched her and felt a bolt of science fiction pass through the bones, a sense that we were all actors visiting from a parallel America where people sign away lives for applause from strangers they imagine will clap. Conspiracy is theater that denies it is theater. I was preparing a parody that would admit it. On a Saturday, masked as a wellness day, my wife proposed an urgent talk about legacy, an urgent talk about succession, an urgent talk about protecting the family from chaos, and the lover arrived with folders and a tone of antiseptic empathy. And I opened the living room shades so the sun could act as a witness, because sunlight has a way of testifying even when lawyers fall asleep. And I allowed them to stage the scene exactly as they had storyboarded it. While they spoke, my recorder listened for trigger phrases. Transfer, A sign, irrevocable. When the net was fully around their ankles, I asked for a bathroom break and walked to the study where a notary waited who works for a documentary film crew that loves truth more than cake. And I told her that in 10 minutes she would meet 2 people whose signatures could not keep a story straight. And she chuckled and checked the ink. The papers they handed me looked like a menu translated by a robot that hates punctuation. The top page said Amendment to the Family Plan, which is a title that tries to hug you while its hands lift your wallet. Buried in paragraph 7 was an assignment of beneficial interests to a new entity in Nevada with a name that pretends to care about children. I complimented the formatting and asked whether the assignment was reversible, a question I already knew the answer to, and the lover said we could always make adjustments later, which my counsel had explained means never. And I asked my wife whether she felt comfortable transferring stewardship, and she said the word comfortable like a lullaby for a baby made of dollars, and I took the pen with the camera and placed its eye at the hinge of the signature line. The notary came in, neutral as an envelope, and the lover stiffened because men like him fear neutral people who cannot be courted by adjectives. I did not sign. I wrote in a careful hand, accepted for review, which is not a signature and not consent and not even a handshake. The lover protested and said timing was important because of market conditions and tax windows and other weather reports that do not exist. And my wife said delay would cause anxiety for the family, always the family. And I nodded at the word as if it were a balloon I might release later. And I excused myself again and walked to the pantry where a second camera watched the hallway. And from there, I texted my counsel one letter, a letter that told her to press play on the filings. Within minutes, the trusts began to shift like a tectonic plates. The rivers rerouted. The waterfall clauses opened. The honesty dividend lit up like a runway at night. It is important to say that I did not design my plan to humiliate. I designed it to teach the truth where the truth had been dismissed as a provincial superstition. But humiliation arrived anyway because when a cheating wife meets the mirror she has remodeled, the mirror cannot decide which face to return. My wife accused me of surveillance like it was a sin, and I told her surveillance is what people call attention when they wish attention would stop staring. And I told her the recordings were lawful. And I told the lover that paragraph 7 did not point to Nevada anymore. It pointed to a shredder that returns confetti to the land as compost. And then I invited them to walk with me to the study for a final scene. We stood in the wood and leather quiet. I placed on the desk a folder labeled Evidence, which is a word with sharp little corners. Inside were transcripts, timestamps, photographs, and a simple letter addressed to the state bar explaining that a counselor had advised a married client while in an intimate relationship with the client's spouse and had attempted to exploit that intimacy for financial gain. The lover paled in a way that made me worry about his circulation. My wife reached for my forearm, a gesture that had tamed me many times before, and said we could repair this, we could reset, we could call it a cry for help brought on by stress. The parody wrote itself. I said stress never forged a signature. Stress never drafted a siphon. Stress never whispered on a lakeside sidewalk that the idiot would never see it coming. I had prepared a final, almost comic flourish. The living room television came alive with a montage of small American rituals that are stronger than schemes. My father in a photograph with a concrete crew. My mother in a church basement with a cake knife, our child riding a bicycle with a helmet too large. I said that is family. That is the word you kept waving like a flag while your other hand pulled at my pockets. I said this plan of yours was not a romance, it was a budget with stage makeup. I said there would be a separation, yes, and there would be a court, yes, and there would be an honest accounting, yes, and that I would not tarnish our child's name with your choices, but that I would place the truth where it belongs, which is everywhere. In court, the story did the work. Evidence is a stern teacher, and jurists respect stern teachers because stern teachers saved them in 8th grade. The state bar wrote to the lover using language that only looks polite. His license went on a shelf to gather a layer of dust that will never fully blow off. He petitioned for mercy and arrived dressed in humility that had never been taken out of its packaging. My wife's counsel tried to recast the tale as a misunderstanding wrapped around an emotionally neglected spouse, but recordings are hard to seduce, and timestamps do not answer to romance. The judge, who has seen versions of this play so often she could perform any role, called the scheme by its name. The trust stood. The rivers kept their rhythm. At home, the air changed. The house felt taller because secrets had been removed from the vents. There were afternoons when grief swept through like a sudden winter, because betrayal is not only a crime, it is also a funeral for the future you believed in. And I allowed myself to grieve fully, because revenge, without grief, becomes a statue that stares but does not breathe. I met with our child's counselor and told the whole truth scaled for young ears. I turned down the volume on the word cheating wife in the presence of small hearts, because adults should take the weight when the weight is heavy. I kept the word betrayal where it belonged, which was on the lips of lawyers and in the filing cabinets of consequence. I walked the neighborhood at dusk the way men walk who need the horizon to tell them something honest. I ran into couples at the country club who asked how I was, and their eyes did that frantic arithmetic people do when they wonder if they have ever underestimated their own spouses, and I wanted to tell them that marriages are built on daily quiet engineering, not on speeches. That contracts exist for the day speeches begin lying, and that anyone who tells you that love and law are enemies has never met a house that needed both a heart and a foundation. When the settlement came through, it did not taste like victory. It tasted like water after a long drive through a desert you did not know you were crossing. I had kept the $130 million I built. The Scholar Fund grew. The woman from Queens sent a card that said, "Keep your documents and your dignity both in the safe," and I put that card on the refrigerator where I could see it before coffee. Months later, I saw my wife at a distance on a street that sells hope by the hour. She looked the way people look when they have tried to outrun their mirrors. We did not speak. I wanted to tell her that I remembered our early years when we were two people building a small fortress against a loud world, and that I could still taste the sweetness from those days, and that I would protect that sweetness for our child, even if it no longer protected us. I wanted to tell her that truth is not a weapon. Truth is the weather. You can curse it. You can pretend you do not feel it. You can move to a different city and dress for it differently, and it is still the weather. She turned the corner and was gone. At the office, my team asked whether I would change the way we build things, whether I would become suspicious of everyone and everything. And I said, vigilance is not suspicion. It is love wearing glasses. We instituted a rule that any instrument of consequence must be read aloud by someone who did not write it, because hearing reveals what eyes excuse. We taught a workshop called Family and Finance where the words mean what they say. We told our clients that privacy is not a bunker. Privacy is a lit room with the right doors and the right locks and a guest list you can recite in your sleep. On certain evenings, I stand in the kitchen and polish the walnut table the way my father used to polish his tools, a circular motion that reassures wood and mind. The surface shines. If you lean close, you can see your face. If you lean closer, you can see the room around you, the chairs, the window, the slice of sky. I think about narrative, about how they believed the story would bend if they spoke with enough confidence. And I think about how America forgives almost everything except the attempt to rig the ending. The plan failed not because I am clever, although I am not slow, but because the plan required the world to be blind in all the places where the world is actually wide awake. I tell myself that I did not survive this for the pleasure of triumph. I survived it because the future requires adults who can carry both justice and mercy without letting either spill. Mercy does not erase accountability. Accountability does not forbid mercy. Our child grows, asks questions, rides that bicycle, joins a team, does homework at this very table that once hosted a gunless duel, and sometimes asks whether love is safe. And I say, love is not safe. Love is worth it, and the worth is proven not by what you say over candlelight, but by what you do when papers arrive that try to rename your life while smiling sweetly. I do not say cheating wife. I say history. I do not say betrayal. I say lesson. I do not say revenge anymore. I say repair. They thought I had no clue, but I had a plan. The plan was simple. Tell the truth with receipts. Protect the house with architecture. Protect the child with tenderness. Protect myself with time. I begin each morning with a list that includes small chores and one large sentence. The sentence says, "Do not let this make you smaller." I pour coffee. I answer emails. I call my mother. I send a check to the scholarship fund. I go to work. I come home and cook a meal. I set 2 plates. I set a 3rd plate for the future. The future is punctual. It arrives on time. It eats well. It does not sign anything. It does not read twice. It loves without theater. It speaks in a voice that understands that family is not a slogan. It is a practice, renewed daily, indexed, not to feelings alone, but to acts, and guarded not by suspicion, but by clarity.